Marketing. I said it. The M word. Marketing. We're artists. We don't know how to do that. It's a completely foreign concept. The idea of promoting ourselves as a business when what we create is art. And the idea of twisting and turning our creations into a commodity that can be consumed by the masses is not something we want to grasp. And yet, no matter which writers group I go to, one of the most often asked questions is, how do I promote myself? I just finished my first book. How do I get exposure? How do I send my work into the masses so that I may become the next superstar? I've been doing this for over 20 years now. And the unfortunate reality is there are no set answers. No one has created the Bible of promoting your books. There have been authors that have written some quality books. But the truth of the matter is, what works for author A doesn't necessarily work for author B. What works for romance writers doesn't work for horror writers. But there is one thing that I can tell you to do. The only answer that I have to that question, that I can assure you will go a very long way to helping you. And this is not just for writers. This is for musicians, for painters, for poets, for dancers, for actors, for anyone out there creating, who is pursuing a creative endeavor. The only thing that you can do that will ensure success is to do more. I remember very, very clearly, as if it just happened, the moment that I typed "the end" on my very first book. That book was A Blade Away. I wrote it quite some time ago. And I remember I was living in a friend's house in the basement at the time. I had actually painted my office, all of the walls and the ceiling and the floor. I painted it all black so that all I could see when all the lights were off were my computer monitor, so I could focus, because I really wanted to do this. So I wrote "the end." I leaned back and I put my hands behind my head and I said, "Next." Because I knew that I didn't want that to be one of those things that was nothing more than an Anton Chekhov, a checked off item from a bucket list. I knew that I wanted to be a writer. So the first thing that I thought after I finished that first book was not, now what do I do? How do I get this published? How do I promote it? The first thing that I thought was, what do I write next? And that, dear watchers, should be the first thing that comes to mind when you finish your first book. What do I write now? Actors, you've gone to your first audition, you've won your first role, your first Actors Equity role, and you start rehearsal in a month. What is the first thing you should do? Okay, where do I get work after this? You always have to be thinking forward. Because the best thing The best thing that will sell that work that you have in your hands that you just finished is the next piece of work. That is the only solid advice that you should ever listen to with regards to what to do next. Because it's really the one thing that's in your control. Because readers buying your books, that's not in your control. Clearly Facebook is no longer in our control because we can't decide who sees what. But the one thing that you can control is the second you finish that book, you start your next. Here's how I work. Okay, just to give you an idea. I start a first draft, and it usually takes me about 2 months to finish that first draft. Somewhere around halfway through that first draft, I have decided what I'm going to write next. The second I write that last sentence, I send that book off to the editors, the beta readers, or whatever, and then I start the next book. So while I'm writing the next draft, the first draft of the next book, the editors or whoever is working through the previous book. And it's kind of like a constant, it's a treadmill. And it never stops moving. And that is my next point that I want to mention. If you've been in this long enough, you've probably heard the phrase, it's a marathon, not a sprint. No, it's not. It's neither a sprint nor a marathon. It's a hamster wheel. It is a never-ending hamster wheel. And we're just running and running and running and running and running and running and running. And then at the end, she never appears. There is no horizon on the distance. There is no end. There is no finish line. Because if you think of it in terms of a marathon, then you assume that there's a finish line, and that means you're going to either lose momentum or you're going to stop. So never assume that there's a finish line. Just assume that the marathon never ends. And the second you've finished one race, you've got to pick up another one. So, starting your next book and never assuming there's an end point. Those are probably the best bits of advice that I could give you as far as promoting your career and moving your career as a writer or an artist forward. You've got to really let go of the stereotypical ideas and the thought that what works for this person will work for you. Because the only thing that will work for you is what you can accomplish on your own. And that means always be writing. And never assume that there's an end point. Always know that this journey is going to forever be moving forward. And while you're journeying, while you're on this journey, please make sure to grow, expand your knowledge. Read and experience. Go outside and let nature and music and movies and interaction with other people, let it all inspire you. Because without that kind of inspiration, without that kind of connection to the world around you, what are you going to draw from? The imagination needs to be fueled. Always. Anyway, I've gone on long enough. I have rambled and you have listened, and now it's time for you to go back to your keyboards and type. Thank you so much for deciding to travel on this little journey with me. I hope I've inspired you or enlightened you somehow, or maybe even entertained you. Anyway, this is the Jack Verse. I appreciate you, I love you, and I want you all to have a good day.